But thank you very much for joining us. Now, the question we're asking people today is about this warning, we understand, from Donald Trump, warning Putin not to escalate the war in Ukraine. This is amid fears or hopes, depending on your perspective, that the US will cut back support for Kyiv. And basically, Donald Trump will force Zelensky to the negotiating table, but from a position of weakness. I want to know, how should Britain respond? Should we, along with other Western allies, particularly in Europe, up our spending? This 2.5% everyone's talking about of GDP, is that even remotely touching the size of what we really need? Should we be giving more help or less help to Kyiv? Should we be telling Zelensky to get to the table? And I just want to know, I mean, how much of your country would you be willing to give in? How many of your children are you happy to have abducted? How many of your fellow countrymen and women are you happy to have slaughtered by the Russians? And what would you negotiate? I'm just fascinated by people's thoughts on this. Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Text the word talk, then your message to 87222. You can send us a message on X at talkTV. Don't forget the calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Philip Ingram, I'm reminded, as I often am, by the tweet I put out some months ago where people say, well, they should get to the negotiating table. It's costing us too much. I mean, large part, the huge extra costs that we've seen in our energy bills and pretty much everything we buy at the supermarket, everything, that actually has been down to the sanctions on Russia as a result of the Ukraine war, and of course the limit on stuff coming out of Ukraine. Huge. I mean, the basket, the breadbasket of Europe is called that for the reason, because it's so crucial for our world supplies. But and I messaged going, well, exactly, OK, how much of Britain, if we were invaded by Russia or any other country, how much of Britain would you be willing to give away? Which parts of Britain? You're always saying, give away Crimea to Ukraine, give away large parts of the Donbass region. I sent this rather pompous tweet out, only to get the only correct response on Twitter or X, which was people going, well, Liverpool, London, Norfolk. There were quite a few calls for London. They'd happily give away London to Putin. I mean, you know, we can laugh about it, but actually we are talking about saying to a country, not really our problem, guys. You're just going to have to give up a big part of your land. But a lot of people say, well, that will end the slaughter. That will end the huge cost. So why not do that? Philip Ingram, why do you say not? Well,
there's a number of different things here. Instead of bringing it down to the country, ask people how much of their house they'd give up if their neighbour decided to come in and just take it over. Well, I'll take 3/4 of your garden and I'll just keep that and take 2 kids or take your wife and then we'll negotiate from there. I think we're looking at this too much through one lens, and that lens is force Zelensky to give up territory. What if we force Putin to come to the negotiating table, and therefore there's an awful lot of backing that goes to Zelensky to properly take the gloves off and take the fight into Putin. That could be much easier than trying to change the resolve of the Ukrainian people. And you know, when we look at this talk that happened, this phone call that happened between Trump and Putin, that did or didn't happen, that the Russians are denying. That is a typical Russian tactic for the talk not going, or the phone call not going the way the Russians wanted to. And what was the immediate response in Russian national television? Nude pictures of the president's wife being plastered all over Russian national.
President's ex-wife, Melania Trump. Well, I mean, to be fair, you know, she posed for them.
Current wife.
She posed for them.
Yeah.
I mean,
she did, but that was Putin's response to Trump after this supposed phone call that didn't happen. Why would you put that up on Russian national television? So there's power play going on between them at the moment, and that's very interesting indeed to watch. Is
that, look, you know, those pictures? She was a model. She posed for a lot of these pictures. You know, is that implication from Vladimir Putin that, you know, don't push your luck, matey. I've got compromat on you. Lots of claims in recent years. I mean, even, you know, former British spies and others that the Russians. I mean, there's a lot of it that's been debunked.
Yep.
You know, goodness knows what going on with prostitutes in hotel rooms in Moscow and video footage and goodness knows what. A lot of it's been debunked, but there is still concern that there is a relationship between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. There was a meeting, was there not, where there were no advisors, no one to take notes, no translators, nothing, just the 2 men in a room for, what, 45 minutes or something at a summit. I mean, that just doesn't happen. Especially when you know, two nations are adversaries. What do you think is behind all of this?
Putin thinks of things and thinks of his tactics, and they're not part of a long-term game plan. He will use the tactic that comes in from a former intelligence officer's perspective, and therefore it's playing those power games behind closed doors to suggest whether there is compromise or not. You know, we had the Steele report that came out looking at it. We don't know, and we'll never know unless it's actually published. But the fact that it's been talked about in the West and everything else is enough to put the political pressure on Trump from his advisors and all the rest of it. So Putin is playing that game. He's trying to sow these seeds that are out there and put pressure on Trump before he even comes in. We're in for some very, very interesting times, and Trump may turn around and say, no, I've had enough of this, I'm taking the gloves off and I'm going to attack. Trump says there was no wars when he was president. There were more drone attacks against specific targets while he was president than any other president. So trying to say he wasn't carrying out military action is wrong.
Yes, and indeed there may be other reasons, other realpolitik reasons which are not relevant. What do you think will happen?
I think what will happen is there will be a big bit of pressure on both sides to try and come up with some form of plan to get to a negotiating table. That's not going to preset a condition for getting there.
But both sides will want to be in the stronger position.
Yes, yeah.
So that means more fighting.
And this is why more fighting. There will be a massive bit of pressure on Europe and on the European element of NATO to increase their defence spending.
Which they should do anyway.
Which they must do, because if you look at it from an American perspective, there are three conflicts that are growing around the world. There's the war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, there's the Middle East that is blowing up, and there's Southeast Asia that is brewing away and could blow up even bigger than all of the rest of them put together.
This is China and Taiwan.
The United States is not in a position to look after all three. The rest of the world wants the United States to look after all three. And
I don't know why taxpayers in Iowa should be funding peace in Europe. I really don't. So that's our job.
And therefore, if the Americans say, hey, we'll influence the Middle East and we'll take on the majority in Southeast Asia, please, Europe and European NATO nations, take on the war in Europe and deal with that yourselves. You've got the money.
Do you remember the incredible criticism of Donald Trump years back when he was president, where he went to summits and said, you guys aren't paying enough? And frankly, if in fact, they wouldn't. NATO members in Europe were largely not actually committed to, not actually spending as a percentage of their GDP, the required amount as part of NATO membership. And he said, look, if you're not going to spend that, then we're going to pull out. And everyone went, oh, and clutched their pearls and said how awful this was. I remember saying at the time, he's quite right. I'm sorry, military spending costs money. But again, 40% of the Russian government spending now is going on military. It is absolutely, and it's not been a strong economy anyway. It's completely reliant on gas and oil. Says there's no diversification. It's an absolutely basket case economy, and again completely corrupt as well. And with oligarchs, goodness knows, just creaming off all the money and spending it on their their prostitutes and their palaces and their private jets. And wasting some of it as well. Democratic governments can't get away with that. Quite rightly, but there's a reason why two democracies have never gone to war against each other, because again you've got the public pulling you back from this. But I do worry in the West that the public are too wary of war. War is a terrible thing, and it is our sons and husbands and brothers who will end up losing their lives on the front line. I understand that. I'm not glib about it. I just think to me this is very similar to the whole. Oh well, there's a hole in the roof. I'm not going to amend it. It will cost too much. Well, yeah, and then in 5 years' time, you're going to have a whole new roof, and your house has fallen down. And I just think that we just are not understanding the threat from totalitarian dictators, the threat from China, from Russia, the threat from Islamic fundamentalists and others. And we just got to get to grips with this stuff, because it's going to keep on a-coming.
No one in the military or no one who's ever been in a conflict zone ever wants a war. The military, I would argue...
Because you know the reality
Exactly.
of it.
I would argue that most people in the military are the biggest pacifists that are out there. There's a big difference, though. Whenever we live in a world where there are bullies that are out there that will bully their way through, those in the military will fight for peace rather than protest for peace, because you've never ever stimulated peace against a bully by protesting for it.
No, that's the reality, isn't it? Let's talk about top priorities, though. Climate change. Generally, on a day like this, the idea that the Prime Minister's going to leave Paris, he's going to fly to Azerbaijan, to Baku, where they're hosting, where the oil-rich nation, hilariously, has been allowed to host COP29, because yet another summit to save the world. Again, we keep being told we're past the tipping point. I don't know why everyone who's worried about this doesn't just relax. We've already gone past the tipping point. Let's all just relax, put the heating on, and get on a lot of planes and holidays and enjoy ourselves. But Keir Starmer is the only pretty much major world leader going. The American, even Biden's not there. I mean, he doesn't even, probably couldn't even find Azerbaijan. Probably couldn't even find Iowa on the map right now. But Trump's not. So Trump's not going. Biden's not going. Macron's not going. Olaf Scholz of Germany's not going. The Indian Prime Minister's not going. The Chinese President's not going. Everyone knows it's just a joke. This was something that everyone pontificated about on the world stage, and we had, I think it was COP26 in Edinburgh, and everyone just sort of did their greenwashing and pontificated as they flew in on private jets, and then flew home on private jets after making some deal they're not going to stick to. Frankly, this little game's over now, isn't it? The world doesn't care anymore.
Well, I think Starmer must be going to do an oil deal with Azerbaijan because he's closing down the North Sea. Because we can close down the North Sea and we go green tick. We're just going to import more from Azerbaijan. It costs more to get it in here.
No, but it means we'll reach our climate targets because they only apply on anything produced here.
Exactly.
Do try and keep up with the programme there, Philip. For goodness sake, it's all about. I mean, it's utter madness. We're going to talk about it a little bit later in the show. Of course we are. You know I love this subject. Oh, sorry, I've just had corrected. COP26 was in Glasgow. Well, I feel stupid now. Yeah, but I mean, they all flew into Edinburgh and then got chauffeured.
They'll visit Edinburgh.
Then it was still a complete waste of time. But there we are. 11:19 is the time. Up next, I want to get your calls. Do give us a call. Donald Trump has warned Putin not to escalate the war in Ukraine amid fears the US will cut back support for Kyiv. Or maybe there are hopes that he'll do that. I want to hear your thoughts on this. How should Britain respond? How should the West respond? Give us a call. 0344 499 1000 is the number. This is Talk.